Hi, I'm Kyle Harris from EFX Sports and FitCore, and I'm going to talk to you about flexibility. I wrote an article on the benefits of flexibility and different modalities of flexibility, as well as the benefits and drawbacks of each. So I want to go through a little bit of that because it may not be clear from reading just the article, so I want to show you some of the things. The first part I talk about in the article is static stretching. Static stretching is a type of flexibility that most people are familiar with. This type of flexibility training incorporates low intensity, long duration holds of a muscle. You want to find a position and hold that at a point of slight discomfort for a long period of time. The research shows that 60 to 90 seconds for 2 to 3 sets is what can help to release tension in the muscle and increase flexibility acutely. Done over time, you can improve flexibility chronically. However, it may not be a type of flexibility you want to use prior to activity because it has been shown through research to decrease strength. So I'm just going to show you a couple of stretches that you can do and give you examples of static stretching. Basically, probably the greatest example you're familiar with is with a hamstring stretch. You see this done all the time by runners and athletes. There's multiple ways you can do it. A modified hurdle stretch where you pull one leg in, and then you find the leg that you want to stretch and you just reach out. And you would hold that position, as I said, 60 to 90 seconds. To increase the intensity of that stretch, you can do both legs at the same time, which incorporates the back musculature as well. Other examples of static stretching would be the quadricep stretch. Most people are familiar with this stretch. And then for upper body, the sleeper stretch, which you can do the sleeper stretch lying down, or you can find an apparatus, come here with your shoulder, and then push down to stretch the posterior region of your shoulder. Now, as I mentioned, static stretching isn't usually good prior to competition or exercise. However, if you have areas that are tender, tight, or problematic, such as hamstrings, people that have pulled their hamstrings oftentimes have reoccurring pulls, it may not be a bad idea to do some light static stretching, maybe for 30 seconds, because the research that shows detriments to strength and performance are done for 60 to 90 seconds for multiple sets. A great time to do static stretching would be post-exercise, post-workout, or post-competition, as it can help to decrease delayed onset muscle soreness, as well as improve recovery and increase flexibility chronically when done in a flexibility training program. The next kind of stretch I want to talk to you about is dynamic stretching. Dynamic stretching is a form of stretching where you move your body through a partial or full range of motion through multiple joints in order to warm yourself up. This is actually the type of flexibility training you want to use prior to activity or competition. It's actually been proven through research to increase performance. There's research you can find that shows improved sprint performance and improved jumping performance. So, a dynamic stretch is something like a prisoner squat. Hands up, you're just squatting through a full range of motion. Other examples are walking lunges or stationary lunges, where you're working the body through a full range of motion. And even greater examples where you're using your whole body are things like jumping jacks. Jumping jacks are a tremendous form of flexibility to use when prior to other exercises or modalities of flexibility, because it's a whole body movement that warms the body and works the body in the sagittal plane, in the upper body, or the frontal plane rather, in the upper body and lower body. So jumping jacks are a great way to do that. Other examples would be walking RDLs, where you come down, or a squat and touch, where you're reaching across your body on one leg. One of the great benefits of dynamic stretching is that you can also incorporate other modalities of training, such as proprioceptive training, plyometrics, and balance training. An example of performing a plyometric that can be performed as a dynamic stretch would be a squat jump. So we can work not only the dynamic stretch, but also plyometrics. Now, one of my favorite dynamic stretches is a skip with an arm cross. And skip and cross our arms. So dynamic stretching is a wonderful tool to use prior to activity and competition. The third type of stretching I want to touch on is something called active isolated stretching. This is kind of a hybrid type stretch. You move your body through a small range of motion, much smaller than a dynamic stretch, and you hold that position for a very short amount of time. The biggest principle that's involved in this is the ability to contract the opposing muscle of the muscle you're stretching. So I'm going to use the hip flexor because it's a very easy muscle to understand on how to stretch using active isolated stretching. So if I stretch this hip flexor, I'm going to get a staggered stance. I'm going to perform an anterior or posterior pelvic tilt, and then I'm going to contract my glute on that side as hard as I can. So I'm stretching this hip flexor and contracting this glute. As I do that, I contract the glute, I hold it for 1 to 2 seconds, and then I relax. Contract, hold that for 1 to 2 seconds, and then relax. I can perform anywhere from 6 to 10 repetitions, holding each repetition for 1 to 2 seconds. And then of course I would want to perform it on the opposite side as well. So I'd contract that glute, feel the stretch, and relax. Feel the stretch, and relax. This type of stretching targets something called altered reciprocal inhibition, which happens when we have altered joint mechanics in certain areas or overactive muscles. It's a great stretch to use prior to or after dynamic stretching and prior to your main activity, whether that's exercise or competition. You do not have to do total body stretches with this. My suggestion would be to find the musculature that's tight, overactive, or problematic for you. For me, that would be my hip flexors. Now, an example of doing it for the upper body would be doing it for the bicep. If I would find something here, I could pull myself into a bicep stretch, stretching the bicep, and I could contract my triceps for a second and then relax. Move into that stretch, contract my triceps for a second, and then relax. Another example would be for the pec. I can come here, up, turn away, hold that stretch for 1 to 2 seconds, then relax. Hold that stretch for 1 to 2 seconds, and then relax. Active isolated stretching is an excellent form of stretching to use intra-workout. So if I was training my chest or my back, I could stretch my chest musculature. Research has shown that stretching opposing muscle groups actually increases the performance of the muscle group you're working. So if I'm doing pull-ups or rows, I could do that pectoralis or chest stretch between sets, and according to research, I may be able to improve my training for my posterior chain. If doing my chest, it helps to reactivate that muscle, keep that muscle loose, and because you're only holding that stretch for 1 to 2 seconds, the detriments of static stretching are not felt with active isolated stretching. Now, lastly, my favorite type of stretching is self-myofascial release. This is the type of stretching that targets the fascial and neuromuscular systems. This is the type of stretching that's very good if you have very overactive, tense, tight, or painful muscles. When we have overactive muscles, what happens is we build up adhesions in that musculature that run opposite or within the muscle fibers. So if my muscle fibers are running like my fingers are here, those adhesions build up through this way, and it creates basically a mesh in there that's very tight and overactive. And it can cause microspasms of the muscle that we don't even feel that basically perpetuate that tension and overactive muscle. So what we do with self-myofascial release is we find those trigger points of the muscles and we hold pressure for 30 to 60 seconds, and that helps release it. This works by targeting what's called the Golgi tendon organ, and it helps to release that tension and tightness so we can actually move on to other methods of flexibility. So as I mentioned, I have tight hip flexors, and that musculature runs through the beginning of my quad. So for self-myofascial release, I can take a foam roller like this. I can use PVC piping, a tennis ball, a baseball, a softball, whatever I'm comfortable with or have on my hands. And I roll around until I find that tight overactive area, and then I put as much pressure on it as I can stand, and I hold that for 30 to 60 seconds. Oftentimes when we have overactive musculature, there's other muscles around that area that are tight. So if I'd hit my hip flexors or my TFL here, I might want to try to get my piriformis or my glutes in the back and hit those muscles as well. So I can hit my glute or my piriformis here, and then I can move along the side, front, or back of my leg as need be. After self-myofascial release, that's a great time to perform things like dynamic stretching. Dynamic stretching can then be moved on to active isolated stretching, and then we can go on to our performance, our activity, our competition, whatever our main event's going to be that day. Post-workout then is a great time to use self-myofascial release again. Research shows that self-myofascial release not only helps to reduce the overactive muscles, but it also helps to reduce delayed onset muscle soreness and improve recovery. So utilizing self-myofascial release after exercise is an excellent way to help promote recovery in the body. After that, I'd recommend doing your static stretching. That's the greatest time to hold those stretches for long durations, low intensity, and actually increase flexibility. I hope that this video on flexibility training has provided you with information that you can use in order to improve your flexibility, decrease or prevent injury, and also improve your performance. Thank you.